Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today with Andrew, the co-founder of Arch Public. They develop algorithmic trading software for retail investors, right, Andrew?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Awesome. And
Um, we do, our big push over the past couple of months has been our Bitcoin algorithm, specifically the arbitrage strategy. That is remarkable stuff. Next week, we're going to announce opening up access for retail traders to our Ethereum and Solana algorithms and the arbitrage strategies for those as well. We're going to continue expanding our crypto offerings. On the crypto side, as of next week, we'll have Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana. And then a month from now, we're going to open up to, again, retail traders. We're going to open up several more, two of which I know are going to be Avalanche and I believe Aptos. And then I think two more after that. So over the next 90 days, we'll end up adding six more algorithms to our shelf, so to speak. We have a total of, after those six are launched, we will have a total of 18 algorithms that exist inside of our ecosystem. We've been doing this for 5 years, and we've never believed that there's one algorithm that is the end all be all. That's a recipe for disaster. So we keep innovating, we keep developing. 80% of our staff is research and development. So we just keep at it and give people access to stuff. Our Bitcoin algorithm, by the way, if you go to our website, which you just showed, it's free. It doesn't cost you anything. It's free forever. So we encourage people to dip their toes in and see what it is that we do. All of our crypto algos work in connection with TradingView. So simple stuff, real simple setup type stuff. And we love giving people access to technology that for years, 40 plus years, have been siloed inside of the world of Wall Street. So 25 years ago, there were 3,000 to 5,000 people on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange doing things. Now there's, 15 to 50 at any given moment during the trading day, because 80% of all trades globally are affected via algorithmic software means of some sort. So taking that technology, which has been around for a couple decades, and bringing it to regular folks.
incredible. And you guys have a partnership with Gemini. We partner with Gemini. So anyone listening, if you sign up for Gemini and spend or trade $100, you can get a $20 bonus with the code PIO20. That's PIO20. Gemini,
Right.
definitely one of the best exchanges for Bitcoin and crypto. So Andrew, first topic of conversation I wanted to dig in with you. I want to talk about the Bitcoin cycle, where we're at with the Bitcoin cycle. But Michael Saylor just announced, as he has been announcing on a near weekly basis for quite some time now, that MicroStrategy's acquired, another something like 20,000 Bitcoins. At this point, they're just a hair shy of 500,000 Bitcoins on the balance sheet. So my first question is, do you believe that MicroStrategy is going to eventually own 1 million Bitcoins?
If Michael Saylor has anything to do with it, the answer is yes. Michael Saylor has said many, many times on any number of interviews that when Bitcoin hits 500,000, when it hits 1 million, MicroStrategy / now strategy will still be making, weekly buys, monthly buys, whatever the cadence is at that point, will be buying Bitcoin up at those levels. So do I think they get to 1 million? Yes, I think they get to 1 million. Will they beat, by the way, will they beat BlackRock's IBIT product to 1 million in Bitcoin held? Nope, I don't think they will. I think BlackRock's IBIT product, their Bitcoin ETF, gets to 1 million before MicroStrategy does, which is an entirely other conversation. But therein is the reality associated with Bitcoin price over the course of, let's call it, the last 6 months, the next 6 months, and the next 6 months. There is as hardcore a floor underneath Bitcoin price as there ever has been. We have MicroStrategy buying $2 billion worth of Bitcoin at minimum every 2 weeks. We have BlackRock adding massive amount of inflows, and in the Bitcoin ETF asset class, adding inflows 7 out of every 8 weeks over the past, let's call it 13 months. That's not going to stop. That's not going to slow down. So at minimum, you have two factors associated with putting a floor underneath Bitcoin. That there used to be moments like today, or at some point in the last 2 weeks, where there looked like there was significant bad news. For example, the Bybit hack. The Bybit hack 2 years ago or 4 years ago would have spiraled Bitcoin down inside of 30 minutes to 90 minutes, down 15%. At any other time in its life cycle. Last week, it dipped, 2.5% during that time frame, and has just kind of meandered around between 94 and 97 ever since. The price action with Bitcoin has materially changed because of MicroStrategy and BlackRock, and then the others in the Bitcoin ETF game. So from that standpoint, there are the ETF flows. And by the way, that particular chart probably it will almost come to a point where it mirrors Bitcoin volatility, right? The lack of Bitcoin volatility, and how much Bitcoin volatility has shifted down to, instead of fifth or sixth gear, it's in second or third gear these days.
And you pointed out that you think that BlackRock's IBIT ETF product will have more Bitcoin, hit 1 million Bitcoins before MicroStrategy. I agree that it was never a thought to me that MicroStrategy would beat IBIT.
Right.
But these are kind of apples and oranges, right? I mean, MicroStrategy is not an ETF. I know a lot of people like to look at it that way, but it is a publicly traded company accumulating Bitcoin. The next thing I was going to ask you after I asked if you believe that MicroStrategy will get to 1 million Bitcoins is, do you believe Bitcoin will eventually get to $1 million per coin? And my assumption is you think that eventually it will.
Yeah, it's I've heard that. That claim so many times in my time in the space. And probably up until about 4 months ago, I can even be found on a stream somewhere, over the last 4 to 6 months saying, I just can't get there on Bitcoin to 1 million. It just seems kind of outrageous, right? It seems, for many years, it was clickbait worth. But at the same time, I might be, adjusting my thinking there, that if you have someone like Larry Fink, who's the founder and CEO of BlackRock, going to Davos and talking about Bitcoin and effectively giving a price prediction of between 500 to 700K for Bitcoin over the next few years, we're not that far off $1 million per Bitcoin. If we get to 700, we're only 30-ish% off that number. So, 40% based on 70, whatever, do the math. But point is that, can we get to 1 million? Yes. Will we see it in the next 3 years? I doubt it. Will we see it in the next 7 years? Probably. I think we do.
Yeah. So, okay. So I agree with you. And if MicroStrategy has 1 million Bitcoins and Bitcoin costs $1 million at some point in the future, whether it's 7 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, then they'll effectively have $1 trillion of Bitcoin on their balance sheet owned outright at some point, right? How do you value a company? Like, have we seen anything that even comes close to a company like this? Like, how do you value a company?
Well, we already do have, in free markets and traditional markets, we already do have companies that have gotten to the point where they're worth $3 trillion or more, right?
Worth, but not with $1 trillion of liquid assets on their balance.
Right. That's right. That's exactly right. So, what does MicroStrategy become in terms of its equity value if they have $1 trillion of Bitcoin on their balance sheet? Wall Street has not treated MicroStrategy as in the same way they would treat Apple, or in the same way they would treat Microsoft. But I would say that at minimum, MicroStrategy is probably worth 3 to 5x whatever amount of Bitcoin is on their balance sheet, and the price associated with it. Sailor would love it to be 10x, 12x, whatever the number is. But still, Sailor being the guy that is championing, Bitcoin on corporate balance sheets. If he ends up with what he ends up with on his balance sheet, and then at the same time, the price goes to $500,000 to $1 million per Bitcoin, his thesis will have proved itself remarkably right. Now, the truth of the matter is that, men's best laid plans, as they say, oftentimes, find themselves navigating a speed bump or two along the way. So that's why my thoughts about 1 million Bitcoin are closer to 7 years than they are in the next 3 years.
Absolutely. I mean, it would be a very aggressive prediction for in the next 3 years, which will, seemingly fly by for us to just 10x from here. I mean, you never know, especially with the ETFs. And if nation states if Saudi Arabia just decides to an outrageous amount of money in Bitcoin, see that. So back to MicroStrategy. Is this a Berkshire Hathaway level organization in the making to you? Is that a comp? Like, I'm just trying to figure out if there's any comps in your mind, either in the market now or throughout history for publicly traded companies.
So here's the reason why that's a well-placed theory, because it can be a Bitcoin version of a Berkshire Hathaway. Because remember, we're not talking about a Bitcoin version of Berkshire Hathaway in the same way we would have 3 years ago, because the Bitcoin ecosystem is on the verge of exploding in terms of product that exists connected to Bitcoin right now and in the future. So we have spot Bitcoin, we have Bitcoin ETFs, we have Bitcoin options, we will have Bitcoin focused lending, we have Bitcoin swaps. There is going to be an increasingly large amount of Bitcoin products that will find its way to market. And so, if you're one of the top 3 holders of Bitcoin on the planet, Satoshi's wallets, BlackRock, and MicroStrategy, you're in a position to adjust your business model to be not only just a holder of Bitcoin, but the largest service company associated with the Bitcoin ecosystem in the world. My guess is that we're already seeing the first fruits of that shift for MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor right now. The move from MicroStrategy name to strategy as a name for the company, and their logo has a Bitcoin in it. We're on our way there already with that.
Yeah, and with the way that Saylor's raising money, this is to me one of the most interesting and sometimes hard to understand components to MicroStrategy. So I'll kind of simply explain them for the audience in case people are uninformed, and to verify that I have a simple understanding of them.
Yeah.
He has 3 ways to raise money. Well, at first he just took the balance sheet, like the cash they had on hand, and plowed it into Bitcoin. Yeah, that was the first move. Then really the next thing was convertible bonds, right? So issuing convertible bonds. These convert to equity. And what that did is it gave institutional investors in that market a way to get exposure to Bitcoin that they otherwise would have not been able to do. And he gets insane, rates on those bonds. Some of the bonds have outperformed Bitcoin. They're the best performing bonds in that market.
That's right.
Then the ATM or at the market, that's when, there's just an issuing of new MicroStrategy shares. So a dilution of the stock to shareholders. However, it's used to buy Bitcoin, so it's accretive, right? It adds value, so it's diluted, right? And then the last, which we just saw roll out 4 weeks ago, this new securities, STRK, in the preferred market. It's a similar approach to the convertible bond, issuance, in the sense that he provided a new financial product to a pool of capital. Institutional investors can only buy these types of equities in the preferred market. So he gave them an equity to buy, and now people are assuming that that's going to perform well. So that's the newest pool of capital that Saylor has been able to access. Can you think of more opportunities like this for MicroStrategy? Because I had a different guest on that works in wealth management, and he didn't have any specifics that he could think of, but he assumed that there would be other opportunities for MicroStrategy in the future like this.
Well, the fact that we think that strategy is going to be pivoting to being a Bitcoin bank-like structure then they'll be able to issue these types of products without having to get the help of other banks. So that's where we're headed with this, is that Strategy itself becomes a bank and is issuing Bitcoin type like products that they've already used to purchase Bitcoin. They would then flip the script and be part of the process by which those types of products are offered to the public. What I would say is that when you get the attention of and begin to make enormous money for the likes of Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, and Barclays, there's never going to be an end to the opportunity to raise more capital to buy Bitcoin, especially in a niche and growing asset class. So the reason why Goldman and Morgan and Citi and Barclays, for example, as the lead issuers of their last raise on the preferred side, the reason why, not the preferred side, I'm sorry, but their last debt issue, the reason why they're there is because they can make a premium on those products, because it's a niche product, it's a unique product, and so they can charge a premium for their institutional investors that are buying that product, and they can also issue a premium associated with the coupon because it is a niche product. That business has been, that business in the world of Wall Street and investment banking had all but gone away since the financial crisis in 2008-09. The fact that it's coming back and it's being led, the charge is being led in some small way by Bitcoin and Bitcoin product, is pretty amazing stuff. It's pretty unique. So they're going to continue to have more and unique ways to raise capital. And we'll see that over the next 6 to 12 months. I don't think there's going to be a moment where MicroStrategy finds itself in a spot where they're going to, hey, we can't, having a hard time raising any more capital, can't buy any more Bitcoin. That's not going to happen. Not going to happen.
Makes sense. And so right now the stock's at about $75 billion market cap. Look at Home Depot. That's a 5x from where we're at right now. Is there any other opportunity in the stock market in terms of like risk adjusted opportunity that, compared to MicroStrategy? Because I try to poke holes in it for myself, and I just don't understand how this thing at $75 billion, how there's more value somewhere else. Obviously, it's going to be volatile on the way, but
so listen, I'm not the world's foremost expert on MicroStrategy's stock, and I won't claim to be, but I am pretty good when it comes to macro trends. So let's talk about macro trends and MicroStrategy's involvement in those macro trends. So you've just had Charles Schwab 5 days a week. You can now trade 24 hours a day. That is a Bitcoin and crypto driven move by Charles Schwab, because the Bitcoin and crypto markets are siphoning away small pieces of capital that a decade ago would have stayed at Charles Schwab. All right. Same thing for IBKR, same thing for all their competitors, Fidelity and the like. At some point, they're all going to go to 24/7 trading. Another part of why they made that move, Charles Schwab, that is because BlackRock and Citadel are in the process of building an entirely new exchange, the TXSE in Texas, that will be 24/7 from the time they open their doors, right? So we're going to a 24/7 adjustment in the world of traditional finance. That's a big adjustment. How does it connect to MicroStrategy? The way that it connects to MicroStrategy is the fact that you're going to have crypto markets evolve and trade they will cross-pollinate with traditional markets, right? The idea of real-world assets and the tokenizing of real-world assets, all of that stuff is happening now and will find itself into the mainstream over the next 3 to 5 years. Here's another dot plot for you. It was announced that by the great reporter at Fox Business. By the way, I know Charlie Gasparino really well, and she works for him. That Saylor met with the SEC last week or something. Like he met with the SEC associated with digital assets and how to handle and manage that. Right there she is, Eleanor. So here's the truth of the matter with MicroStrategy. The reason why they're meeting with the SEC, the reason why they changed their name from MicroStrategy to Strategy, the reason why they're in the IB world, doing bond-like products, doing equity-like products, doing every version of products, is because as markets adjust and shift and change, there is, and this has to be Michael Saylor's base case, there has to be that something has to be a base layer or a significant base layer to a quote unquote new world associated with traditional markets that trade 24/7 and are attempting to tokenize transactions, so to speak. So Bitcoin is probably that base layer at minimum associated with balance sheets and making sure that there's liquidity associated with those markets that are trading any version of tokenized assets. So MicroStrategy will end up being at minimum, a massive liquidity provider. So think of it this way, right? So what's the biggest in terms of transactional value? What's one of the biggest liquidity providers in the world of traditional markets and has been for a decade? It's Citadel, right? What did Citadel announce earlier today? That they're going to be involved in crypto. They're opening up a crypto unit, blah, blah, blah. So does Strategy become the next bigger version 2.0 of Citadel, where they're offering constant liquidity associated with the base layer of tokenized whatever on a go forward basis? That's my thesis associated with MicroStrategy effectively becoming a bank-like entity and offering levels of liquidity that is different than liquidity associated with dollars. Bitcoin is a much, much, much significantly better entity associated with liquidity than the dollar is. And again, that's probably Michael Saylor's thesis as well. So, while that's a mouthful, I think that's what's going on associated with what MicroStrategy can become. So you tie it all together. Can they end up with 1 million Bitcoin? Absolutely they can, because here, and now we're in a place where MicroStrategy is providing liquidity to traditional giants potentially over the next 3 to 5 years.
And on your side, as someone that's deep in the TradFi world, have you noticed that? So, like, to me, as a retail investor paying attention to platforms like Twitter and listening to podcasts, I noticed that a lot of increased interest in options on MicroStrategy stock, has just kind of gone viral over the past 6 to 9 months. I'm participating now, selling covered calls on my position, earning some yield. I guess, to you, is that something that could offer some sort of resistance to a bear market to some capacity? Or do you think that's a little overblown? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, it's difficult to make micro calls associated with, an option strategy, right? Options are remarkably volatile, and that's the reason why they make people significant money. People don't realize this, but the whole GameStop saga was not necessarily about GameStop's just pure equity. The real money and the volatility and the squeeze that happened that ended up going viral and sending GameStop from $8 to $400+ in a very, very short amount of time was effectively an option fueled squeeze, right? So that's going to exist with MicroStrategy. That's going to exist ultimately with Bitcoin. And by the way, the two are fairly intertwined, given that they hold nearly 500K in Bitcoin on their balance sheet, right? So if we end up with a Bitcoin option squeeze on the price of spot Bitcoin, MicroStrategy benefits in a remarkable way. If we end up with any sort of squeeze associated with MicroStrategy options over the course of the next 3 to 18 months. MicroStrategy benefits. So if anything, Michael Saylor really has a unique ability to play the markets and to be able to pick up and use the levers and pulleys associated with the traditional markets and play them to his advantage. It's unique. It's unique to watch. It really is.
Yeah. It seems that way. So one quick question about, companies like Metaplanet. Do you have any interest in these other companies, Metaplanet, a Japanese organization, essentially adopting a Bitcoin standard, MicroStrategy Lite, if you will? Any interest in that?
Well, the reason why I have an interest in it is because it's a stood up barbell type of strategy. And what do I mean by that? So in a barbell strategy, you're getting benefits on both ends of the barbell, right? So Metaplanet benefits by having a Bitcoin strategy and that being a significant strategy, just period, associated with its stock. So its stock rises in a world where adding Bitcoin to your balance sheet, the markets see that as a significant positive. So on the top line, you're getting huge benefit associated with an increased stock price, which then allows you to do well. But listen, MicroStrategy stock price and the value of it ended up having it, added to an additional indices, a couple months ago, right? That's a big deal because then institutional investors that are creating certain types of products have to add it to their indexed type of stuff. So Metaplanet in the same way. So when you add Bitcoin to your balance sheet in a meaningful way, not only do you get top line, what I would call PR exposure that helps. You get top line price movement with your stock. That is very, very helpful. You also get bottom line removal of things like aggressive short sellers. So short sellers don't like to short something they don't understand. And short sellers have not gotten to the point where they have a real understanding of what could or couldn't go wrong with corporations and public corporations that put Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So you're to the downside and you're benefiting in a huge way to the upside. Also, you get name recognition in a world we live in where everything's gamified. The younger generations, let's call it, Gen Z and the like, think it's cool when you have Bitcoin on your balance sheet. So now their products are on their radar as opposed to not being on their radar.
Makes sense. And you could potentially see companies, you brought up GameStop. People are speculating that GameStop's going to add, which I think would make a lot of sense for GameStop.
They'd be smart. Their CEO Ryan was seen with Saylor at Mar-a-Lago just, I think, last week.
Yep. And then another name thrown around as a company that would benefit from it would be something like a company like Zoom. Some of these zombie companies, right, that haven't really performed well over the past couple of years, but have a lot of cash.
Well, listen, if the strategy associated with adding Bitcoin to your I will say this, I'll default to Matt Haugen at Bitwise, who's the CIO there at Bitwise. He believes, and it's the firm's belief, that adding Bitcoin to your corporate balance sheet is not just a trend, it's going to be a mega trend in 2025. So if you're Zoom and you choose to do that, if you're, I don't even know if Peloton is still around. If you're Peloton, you choose to, you're going to have that barbell moment where you're getting a huge benefit to your balance sheet. What's one of the things that is closely watched every time Tesla announces earnings? Did they sell any of their Bitcoin?
Yeah.
They don't sell any of their Bitcoin. So whether you see it or not, you get a bump associated with having or keeping Bitcoin on your balance sheet. So it's a smart strategy. Of course, then it comes down to how much cash does Zoom have on its balance sheet to start the process of owning Bitcoin. I don't know. Haven't looked at their documentation from the last quarterly earnings report.
Yep. No, makes sense. And then on the Bitcoin side, before this cycle, we've kind of been married to this 4-year cycle, right? The 4-year Bitcoin cycle. Some outlier events that have happened now is we got the ETF. The all-time high for Bitcoin price was broken prior to the halving, right? And now we just have this kind of like odd cycle compared to previous ones in terms of price action, where Bitcoin is hanging out at $100,000 right now, but it broke its all-time high very early. Altcoins have had a really weird cycle. You look at Ethereum underperforming.
Yeah.
Really, the only altcoin from last cycle that's outperformed is Solana. And maybe that's because it was mispriced. It kind of went too far down after the FTX debacle.
Right.
Do you think that we still have a 4-year Bitcoin cycle now that we have, the ETFs and we have MicroStrategy doing what it's doing and TradFi is here and potentially nation states also?
Yeah, I don't know. I would probably bet against the traditional. It's hard to say traditional because it's only been around for 12 years now, but the idea of a traditional Bitcoin cycle associated with the halving, blah blah blah. Yeah, we're probably moving beyond that. I think the cycle has adjusted a bit because, again, as I talked about, we started the show. The floor that's been put in associated with Bitcoin is difficult to break through. So the ceiling is probably softer than the floor is. So that's a meaningful adjustment to the cycle. I would say that, again, when people in crypto, it's as if Larry Fink showed up and they're like, "Oh, it's cool, Bitcoin ETFs, it's awesome. I'm going to move on now." It is nearly impossible to communicate what a big deal it is that Larry Fink has become a Bitcoin evangelist. Inside of his firm, they've got a fund internally that's building on 4 or 5 other different chains, wants to tokenize real world assets and open up a new exchange in Texas that does that. And then 4, he's out there comparing the growth of of Bitcoin and a potential Bitcoin economy that could rival the scale of mortgages here and what that meant for traditional finance and the growth of mortgages. That is mind-blowing stuff, man. The mortgage market became, essentially the mortgage market was the underpinning of the entire financial world through 2008 and 2009. And to some degree it is with most banks, right? That is the nature by which they move value, is by lending money for people to buy homes, and then they keep those deposits are used for that process. So comparing Bitcoin to the mortgage market, saying Bitcoin's going to 5 to 700K, and then beyond the words, there's actions inside of that firm beyond the Bitcoin ETF, but also with an internal fund that's building on other chains and tokenizing real world assets. I mean, my gosh, this guy is, it's almost as if he's turned into a version of, Satoshi and Vitalik that merged together or something. It's really something. So where do we end up in the cycle? That's the reason why I think the cycle is adjusted or busted up, because we have players here now that traffic in trillions of dollars of assets, not billions.
That makes perfect sense. Speaking of Larry Fink, outside of Bitcoin, one of the most interesting kind of components to this cycle, in my opinion, is Ethereum's underperformance, like I just mentioned. But there are Ethereum ETFs, including a BlackRock Ethereum ETF. And Larry Fink has brought up Ethereum when he talks about tokenizing everything.
Sure.
So do you think the same principle applies to Ethereum?
Well, I think that, Michael Saylor always says there is no second best, but in everything in life, there is a second best. I think that when you ask me that question, the reason why I hesitate is because oftentimes as an asset class or markets or something matures, what ends up being the second or third largest may not potentially exist in a meaningful way today. Let me give you an example. Whether it is the rise of the personal computer, whether it was the rise of automobiles through the 20s and 40s, whether it's the rise of technology overall, whether it's the rise of the internet, there was enormous consolidation, and people that survived, the companies that survived became huge. And then some of the companies that ended up being the leaders after the consolidation and after the boom and the bust and then the consolidation and then the maturing of that particular asset class, they didn't exist in the previous boom portion. So could Ethereum turn into what we think it should over time? Maybe, possibly, but I'm not entirely convinced. Is there a world where something else ends up being what we thought Ethereum should be in 3 to 5 years? That's also possible. So I don't know. The answer to that is I'm not entirely sure. My gut instinct says that 5 years from now, we can look back, those of us that were around, and say, some of you don't remember, but this is what we thought Ethereum was going to be. It could be something that doesn't exist right now.
Oh, right. And so do you think that the reason why BlackRock pushed for Ethereum ETF approval is simply because that's another crypto product and that's the second biggest asset, so they're not going to do
that? Yeah, it's gathering assets, right? So BlackRock is the largest asset manager on the planet to the tune of almost 12 trillion. There's a big difference between an asset manager and a custodian, right? So you may see Bank of New York Mellon or State Street that has more assets, like 40 trillion or 20 trillion, but they don't manage those assets. Those are just assets that sit on the books as a custodian, making sure that they don't go somewhere they're not supposed to go. It's just a banking. It's the pulleys and levers and pipes of banking. But the biggest asset manager in the world is thinking, yeah, we'll have an Ethereum ETF because it's the second largest, and we'll probably gather a bunch of several million, potentially billions, and assets associated with an Ethereum ETF, and they've been correct. So yeah, it's nothing more than the difference between all the different hyped up internet stocks, or when you're in an asset class, it's a class for a reason. You have to have a multitude of representatives in that quote unquote asset class. They'll do a Solana ETF as well.
Yep. And speaking of asset classes, we've been describing within crypto, separating Bitcoin and crypto in this discussion thus far.
Right.
Do you think that if XRP or another one of these crypto assets dethrones Ethereum, even for a day or two, in that number 2 spot by market cap, that's the ultimate separation of Bitcoin versus crypto? Because a lot of people don't believe in the Bitcoin and crypto kind of, verbiage. And last cycle, right, like people were trying to say that Ethereum was ultrasound money. People were trying to say that Ethereum was going to replace Bitcoin, flip Bitcoin, and market cap, all of these things. You don't hear any of that now. Right?
Right. Well, what you hear now is they just want Ethereum to survive and potentially get back to its rightful place as second best. There's no more talk about, the flippening. There's no more talk about Ethereum's going to be this, that, or the other. In fact, I know of several hedge funds that made that bet in the crypto space and got blown up because of it, and no longer exist. Some of them are no longer on Twitter. They're gone. A couple well-known ones in the space. So, do we see somebody flip Ethereum? That's entirely possible. Solana could be that one, but again, the market's going to make those decisions for us, right? If Ethereum continues to struggle with the likes of, the Franklin Templetons, the Fidelities, and the BlackRocks giving access to some of the other largest institutions on the planet to put capital, park capital with Ethereum effectively. If that's not enough to keep Ethereum where it's at and give them cause to go out and keep building something extraordinary, well, that just is what it is. Market forces take over and you end up not being number 2 at some point.
Yep. And speaking of the rest of the alt market, do you have any thoughts on why alts have underperformed so drastically this cycle compared to the previous cycle?
Because remember, who are the two biggest buyers of crypto, so to speak, over the past year. So
BlackRock.
again, we talked about a floor associated with BlackRock and all the Bitcoin ETF products. They've moved 60 billion plus of assets into those products, and then on top of that, you've got MicroStrategy. MicroStrategy isn't out there buying Solana to put on their balance sheet. They're putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Metaplanet not buying Solana or ETH to put on their balance sheet. It's Bitcoin. So the taking the oxygen out of the room associated with Bitcoin ETFs has been probably the reason why there's been a limited altcoin movement that's been attached to Bitcoin's movement. And oh, by the way, when somewhat more sophisticated investors show up in size to the space, they're not fooled by the garbage, right? So there's, case could be made that a sizable portion of altcoins are not material. They're not meaningful assets to hold. So if you're in that camp and, you're running the pension fund for Wisconsin school teachers, you're not putting your money into Ethereum or Solana, you're putting it into Bitcoin because you want to have some exposure. That's the only exposure you're comfortable with. You're going to be careful. So it's a bunch of people that have been around since 17, 18, 19, 20, and they want to goof off with some extra money. That's all happening at the meme coin level. That's not happening with altcoins like Chainlink going to new highs. It's an adjusted portion of the the crypto quote unquote cycle.
Makes sense. Is there any altcoin that you're particularly interested in anywhere?
I think well, I would say this. I'm a fairly Bitcoin centric guy, but I do find a couple of projects interesting. One, Solana is interesting because it's been able to scale. It's kind of everybody's favorite sandbox at this point. And the idea of transactions, speed and price, they've got an advantage there. But would I hold meaningful amounts of it? No. Another project that I find interesting is a not former, but a Bitcoin OG has a project out there that brings together AI and crypto, quote unquote, tokenomics, and that's the Venice token, VVV.
Eric Voorhees.
Yeah, Eric's project. I think Eric is, Eric's bona fides are they're unquestioned in terms of his time in the space. I mean, he was sitting at funny looking tables and chairs at God knows where in 2010, 11, 12, talking about Bitcoin and being a part of the first Bitcoin exchange, and with Charlie Shrem and a little bit with the Winklevoss twins. I've been around a long, long time. So attempting to make a play in a real world way with a token that's incentivized for use and value with an AI project like Venice, I find that interesting. I do find that interesting.
Yeah, makes sense. Last area, Bitcoin mining.
Uh-huh.
Any, are you interested in holding mining stocks for the long term? They've had moments of outperformance.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more of a MicroStrategy guy if I'm going to buy a Bitcoin equity versus a mining stock. What do you think about the mining?
So they'll have their moments, and if you're going to have a Bitcoin centric portfolio, they probably should be in your portfolio, because when we go through the quote unquote cycles associated with hash rate as well as Bitcoin price, there's a delta there that at some point they have periods where they're wildly profitable, and then they have periods where they're viciously not profitable.
Yeah.
So markets will give you opportunities to own those names, and then markets will reward you at times for owning those names. But it's a very, very different conversation and cycle than just owning Bitcoin, or just owning a Bitcoin ETF, or owning MicroStrategies. It's a different conversation. But I do think, because there's a lot of people out there that have Bitcoin centric portfolios, and frankly, there's companies out there that are building Bitcoin centric funds, right? That you absolutely need to know that in the next 12 to 18 months, there will be ETFs out there that will invest in spot Bitcoin, that will invest in Bitcoin with companies that have Bitcoin on their balance sheet, will invest in Bitcoin miners, and will invest in Bitcoin debt issuance. They'll do all of those things all at once. So I do think they're worth evaluating, and at different times in the cycle will outperform.
Awesome response, Andrew. Well, look, people can find you on Twitter, and your exact handle is Abacus, or AP_Abacus.
Yeah,
right?
it's AP_Abacus. That's right.
Yep. And the company's Arch Public. You're a co-founder. Institution grade trading tools for retail investors. That's the pitch, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And just so people know, our algorithms are not binary. In other words, you don't use our algorithms and they give you a specific buy or sell focused output. You can take, for example, our Bitcoin algorithm, you can set up an arbitrage strategy, you can set up accumulation strategy, you can set up a sell strategy, you can set up 4 different versions of each of those, so that you're now effectively running 12 algos inside of one. So when we say this is an institutional product that we're opening up to retail, we're not kidding. It actually is. So yeah, appreciate the time here, and enjoyed the conversation. Really did.
Yeah, likewise. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you give Andrew a follow. He's one of my favorite follows, very sober and level-headed, not kind of like a crazy psycho bull Bitcoin perspective, just more reasonable. That's at AP_Abacus, at AP_ABACUS on Twitter. And definitely check out Arch Public. That's archpublic.com, ARCH public.com. And shout out to Gemini, who partners with both of us. Sign on Gemini with the code PIO20, and after you trade $100 on Gemini, you will get $20 of Bitcoin. Andrew, thanks again.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Catch you guys next time.